welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to focus on is updating our Power Virtual Agents productivity bot to include data from Planner, our Planner tasks. This is part 2 of a multi-part series. If you didn't see last week's episode, please go ahead and check that out. That was part 1, where we focused on retrieving upcoming meetings or calendar invites and making that available to our bot. In an upcoming episode, we will subsequently talk about retrieving important emails and be able to show that inside of the bot. So with all that said, let's go and let's dive right into the content. Okay, so why is this content important? And this slide looks very similar to the one from last week, but there are a few subtle differences. So naturally, our information is spread across a lot of different services. Could be our email, a calendar, planners, spreadsheets, team sites, you name it. And so how can we actually bring all of this data together? Like, even though Office 365 does a good job of centralizing a lot of this data, how do we actually get it and make it available so that we have it at our fingertips? And one way we can do that is through Power Virtual Agents and building a bot using a low-code, no-code approach, which I think is great. Now, when we use Power Automate and we combine Power Automate with Power Virtual Agents, it really gives us this great opportunity to tap into all of these different data sources by using different connectors. Today we're going to be using the HTTP action, which will allow us to connect to Graph. And we will use Graph to access Planner data. Now, we're not going to use the Planner connector. There's nothing wrong with using the Planner connector. The difference is we want this to be an enterprise bot. And we want to ensure that when a user logs into that bot, we can access that information on their behalf. Doing so by using the connector would be a little bit more difficult because we have to establish connections. And we can't really dynamically create those connections at runtime, nor can we prompt them to provide their own information to bring their own connection. So we're going to use Graph, and we're going to use their token. So we're still going to do this in a secure manner. We're going to use their token that they generate when they actually log on. We're going to prompt them to authenticate. That token is going to get passed into our flow. It is a short time to live, so we don't have to worry about that living for a long period of time and exposing sensitive data. We will get that Planner data, return it back to the bot. Now, the data that comes back from Graph is pretty verbose. There's a lot of information in there. We don't need all of it. So we're going to actually use Microsoft Flow or Microsoft Power Automate to go ahead, parse some of that information, filter some of that information out, and then return a very nice small data set to the bot itself. We'll also talk a little bit about Markdown and how we can use it to help us with formatting, where we can do things like bold and italicize. Last week, in last week's episode, part 1, we actually also used Markdown to generate links because we could provide a link directly to that meeting itself. And we are going to show built-in filtering with Microsoft Power Automate. I will explain why in a couple slides here, just to talk about why we're doing that inside of Flow as opposed to on the API. And then lastly, just as a reminder, if you're trying to emulate this, all flows must be in a solution for them to be discoverable by Power Virtual Agents. So just something to remember. Okay, so the operation that we're going to use to retrieve data from Graph that's related to Planner is called list tasks. And so here is the link to the official documentation. I will include this in the video description if you want to go ahead and check it out and see what is the type of data that's returned. Also do note, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in an upcoming slide, is permissions. We do need to enable group.read.all. We don't need the write all. We're not doing any writes. So it's just read all. This does require an admin consent, and it does need to be delegated because we're going to be doing this on behalf of an end user. So keep that in mind as you go through this exercise. Now, once again, I'm not going to rehash how you set all of the security requirements up for this, because I've already done that in great detail in a previous video. So 002, connecting Power Virtual Agents to ServiceNow. I will walk you step by step of how you create your authentication inside of Power Virtual Agents and the Azure app registration that is required for this. We'll talk about all of these things: client ID, tenant ID, secret, and then API permissions. Now, the only thing different between that video and this video is the permissions that we need to establish to access the Planner data. Previously, last week, we talked about calendars and how we had to include the calendars.read. I'm just leaving that here because I'm sort of building upon this existing configuration. But for this particular episode, this particular functionality as it pertains to Planner, we need this group.read.all permission. And that this is delegated, so do note that it's not application. We want to ensure it's a delegated type of permissions. And then you're going to notice this, not granted for my specific tenant. That 2206 is part of my tenant name. So this is where you do need admin consent. So this is something just to be aware of. If you don't have access to admin, you need to go talk to one of your admins. This may be a sticking point for them. I just want to be upfront about that requirement. And what they can do is log into the Azure portal, click on this grant admin consent, and at that point, this functionality will be unlocked. So very important. Don't want to block you here. Just want to make sure that you're aware of this requirement. Now, the next piece is when we talk about the HTTP action that we're going to use to call graph. Here's the URL that we're going to actually go ahead and use. This is different from the URL we used last week. As you can see, we've got planner and tasks. We can also see that we've got this whack me, whack planner. So what that means is that this is running in the context of the user itself. We're not providing someone else's, GUID or UPN in here. This is just for the person that is actually logged in. And this is why I don't think it's a big security concern, because we're going to have the auth token being passed in from that specific user that has a short time to live. And so basically that token will expire quickly, and we're going to be essentially getting that information from their planner and returning it back to them. One thing, when we go through the demo, you're going to be like, Kent, what are you doing? Why are you filtering inside of Power Automate and that specific flow? And so I'm going to save you folks all some time. I spent probably 2 hours trying to troubleshoot and figure out why OData filtering wasn't working. Now, something to be aware of is when you retrieve planner tasks, even completed tasks will be returned as part of that API call. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to filter out based upon the percentage complete, because completed tasks will have percentage complete of 100%. And I want to say, great, I'm not interested in those. Those are done. I want to focus on what are the things that I have to do. And so I couldn't actually do that through OData filtering. I also couldn't restrict the number of tasks to be returned, because I also wanted to do that much like I did with calendars, because you might only be focused on what are your next 5 tasks. Who wants to boil the ocean and say, oh, well, you might have 50 tasks, but if some are due 3 weeks from now, are you really concerned about them? You're probably more concerned about what are the things due in the next couple days. And so I wanted to be able to do that, but I couldn't because it looks like there's an issue with OData filtering on the list plan tasks. Now, this is from the GitHub page for Microsoft Graph, so the team is aware of it, it's open, and unfortunately we just don't have a resolution at this point, and that is why we're going to do some filtering inside of Power Automate. It is always a best practice to filter at source. It's going to make your workflow, your flow perform better if it has fewer results, especially when you start to introduce looping. So obviously always filter at source. In this case, wasn't able to do it, at least not at this point in time. Once again, our solution architecture, we've got an end user. They're just overwhelmed with the amount of information that is being presented to them, and we want to be able to expose that information to them in a convenient manner using Power Virtual Agent. And this is not meant to replace your email client or your planner client or your calendar. This is just what are the things that are front and center that you need to be focused on right away. And you can imagine just doing this quickly every day, saying, yep, these are the things I need to focus on, instead of going tool to tool to tool to tool, because that's not a great use of productivity either. So with that said, let's dive right into the demo, and I'll show you exactly how all of this stuff works. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the demo, and then what we're going to do is dive into the individual components and give you a better view from that perspective. So here I have some tasks inside of Planner, and these tasks are coming from a variety of different plans. So I've got this home tasks, I've got my YouTube planner plan, and I also have this Phoenix project, which is a project that someone else owns. And in this case, it's a person named John Doe who's assigned to me a task. So that shows up on my board. I just wanted to ensure that you could see how this works inside of Power Virtual Agent, as that information will all flow back to me. Also notice we have this completed task. And this is what I was talking about on the filtering. If I've already completed a task, I don't want it to show up in basically my to-do list inside of my bot. So this is an example of how we will filter out this event, and then we're going to focus on just these 4 events that are returned back. Now, The other thing is that because of the OData filtering, I couldn't actually filter based upon the due date. And so that's something that you could go ahead and further build out in Flow. There's no sort of simple way of doing so, but John Liu does have some examples of how you can do that if you really did want to order basically the order of the tasks being returned to you. So let's hop over into Power Virtual Agents. And so here I've got my enterprise productivity bot. We've got my user topics. So last week we talked about get my meetings, and then today we're going to talk about get my planner tasks. So let's just head over here and let's reset just so you see the whole experience. And I'll show you both just in case you missed last week's episode. So let's just say get meetings. And I don't have to, specify that exactly. I've got 5 different phrases, trigger phrases, and it does use natural language processing to try to understand my intent. Obviously, I could build this out once people start using this just to, ensure that that bot is even more accurate than that. So I'm going to log in. I've obviously have a token inside of my web browser. And so now what's happening is I'm going to get this code where I use this to essentially authenticate myself. And as soon as I've authenticated, you can see I've gone through this path and I have a token, and this token is going to be used when we actually go ahead and pass that into our Power Automate flow. So here we go. How many meetings? I'm just going to say 8. And we can see that I have 2 upcoming meetings. This is where we use that markdown. I've got bold for the subject. I've got the italicized for fonts for the organizer, and I have a meeting link. Now on to today's content. So I'm just going to say get my tasks, get tasks. Now what's interesting, this wasn't on purpose. This was me being careless when I was quickly typing. So Microsoft was able to figure out that this was a bad spelling, but it still understood my intent. So this is pretty cool in the sense that it was able to figure out what was I trying to do and actually go ahead and resolve it. Now notice I've already been logged in. My token, what this means is I still have a valid token at this point in time because we don't want to have to log in like every 10 seconds. But if I came back half hour from now, I'm pretty sure I'd have to log in once again. Now here we go. It's retrieved all of my tasks. So we see 1, 2, 3, 4. We can see that I had one task where it was partially started. It was in progress. Where is it? Right, it got moved into this in progress bucket, and so as a result, that represents that it's 50% complete. So that's why we see that there. Now notice I've got bold for the task name, and then I've got a italicized font for who it was created by. In this case, this is John Doe. They own that specific project. And as a result, we can actually display who was the requester for that task. So this is a great way of me just being able to see what I've got on my list, what's upcoming. And obviously I could do more filtering and sorting and that sort of thing if I wanted, but that wasn't the purpose of this particular video today. Now let's head over to the flow itself. And what we're going to do is we're going to expose a Power Virtual Agents trigger. In this case, we're only providing the auth token as an input parameter. We are then going to go ahead and initialize a variable of type string. And so the reason for this is we're going to append all of our tasks coming from Planner to this string, and we will return just a single string back to our Power Virtual Agents bot. Here's our HTTP action that we talked a little bit about before. Because the filtering stuff doesn't work, I don't have any queries. All I have is my authentication, which is going to be of type raw, and then I'm going to provide a bearer token. So I need to provide bearer space and then my auth token coming from my trigger. Now with HTTP actions, you naturally don't have a typed response. So here I'm going to use parse JSON. I'm going to go ahead and call this. I'm going to then go into my run history. I'm going to copy the output, and I'm going to generate from sample, and then I'm going to have typed output. Now here's where I'm going to go ahead and filter out completed tasks. So I'm going to use the output of this action, which is going to give me a typed response. It's going to include all of my tasks. And then what I want to do is I want to filter out from that message body that's being returned any items that have the percent complete is less than 100%. So that completed task, its percent complete is going to be 100. So anything less means that that's not complete. And then I'll have a filtered list. So that's a very simple and easy way to go ahead and filter out those completed tasks. Naturally, converting my time zone, I want to, everything in the cloud is UTC. So I want to go ahead and filter that out and make sure that I have local time for when it's due. And then here I'm going to go ahead and use the output. So what happens with the response that comes back is you have these nested objects. So what I'm trying to do here is I have this created by node. And now for some reason the display name is coming back null. And I went and double checked with these users in my tenant and they do have a display name. So I can only imagine that this is probably a bug. But what I do want to do is I want to be able to get the name of the person that created the task. So in this case, this is the John Doe example where I will use essentially their ID and pass that into the get user profile action in order to get their display name. Now, because this is like a nested object here, I can't just access it from dynamic content itself. So what I'm going to do is an approach that we did before. So I'm going to use parse JSON. I'm then going to take this as my sample message. I'm going to paste it into here. And then when I do so, I can go ahead and access the information like ID. Now, if there was a valid display name, which you can see that there's not, I could go ahead and access that as well. Then what I'm going to go ahead and do, because this is in a loop, right? So for every single basically node in my array that's being returned back from graph, I'm going to be doing this. And now I'm going to go ahead and just append it to the string called my tasks with, you see these double stars, that's going to ensure that it's bold. When we see single star, that's going to mean that it's italicized. And here we've got like the task name title, percent complete, the converted time, and then who was the creator. And then what we'll go ahead and we will return that back to Power Virtual Agents. Now our Power Virtual Agents dialogue or its conversation is quite simple. I'm going to basically look for these trigger phrases. Do I have tasks? Tasks, show me my upcoming tasks. Then basically I'm going to prompt them saying I need to authenticate you. This is where we have the authentication piece. Giving them an acknowledgement, you've now been logged in. Giving them a message saying I'm now going to try to retrieve your tasks. Here I'm going to go ahead and call an action. And you can do so by clicking on the plus sign, click call an action, and then here we're going to see all of our Power Automate flows show up. And then we would just go ahead and select one. In this case, get my tasks. And here it's going to prompt us because as you recall, we had a parameter for our trigger. We would go ahead and select it. In this case, it's going to be auth token. And then we're going to have basically a response where we store that. So I don't need to keep this here. So what I'll do is get rid of that. And then finally what we'll do is add another message. And we're just going to say, here are your upcoming tasks. And we're going to then provide the tasks result, which was basically our response coming from Power Virtual Agents. So that concludes this episode. I hope you enjoyed that. Look for part 3, probably in the next week or so, where we will then go out and retrieve important emails. Now, once again, if you're not following me on Twitter, I'd encourage you to do so. You can find me at Weare. Obviously, you're on my YouTube channel, so I appreciate that. Please do go ahead, like and subscribe. If you have questions, feedback, please put them in the comments. And then also do note that I do have some Udemy courses. Feel free to check those out if you are interested in them. So take care, stay safe, and we'll catch you next time on the channel. Thank you so much.